Welcome back to Upstart Epoxy, epoxy that you can trust. In this episode, we're going to give you some must-know tips for a glossy and durable epoxy resin piece. Make sure and stay tuned so you can get some tips and tricks on how to perfect your flood coat every time. And always remember, Upstart Epoxy has your back. So always remember, folks, it's imperative anytime that you're going to pour a seal coat or a flood coat that you have a perfectly level surface. Now, the epoxy itself is self-leveling, but if you have a level surface, it makes it that much easier for the epoxy to self-level. That way you don't waste as much. Another thing is you always want to remember that the room temperature in the room that you're pouring your flood or seal coat always likes to be about 70 to 80 degrees. Those are from what we found, those are the perfect ideal conditions for curing to occur. Another thing is you always want to preheat your epoxy, especially if it's a little chilly in your area. And what you can do is you can get you a floor heater or a space heater, put your epoxy in front of it for about 30 to 40 minutes just to make sure that epoxy loosens up and is easier to work with. And you always want to make sure that you do a 1-to-1 ratio anytime that you're using Upstart Epoxy's tabletop epoxy. Another cool thing is that if you mix slowly by hand, you're going to get less air in the mixture itself. So as a result of that, you'll have less bubbles. I always like to mix my flood coats by hand, no matter how big or small. That way, I have less bubbles to deal with, and I don't have to worry about the epoxy curing with bubbles in it. That's the worst look, and you really don't want that, folks. So as opposed to using a drill, if you're going to do a clear coat or a flood coat or a seal coat, always remember, mix by hand. It may take a little more work, but you know what? In the end, the finished result will come out 110 times better than what it would have been with a drill. Trust me on that one, folks. Nobody wants to see unpopped bubbles in their cured seal or flood coat. Now let's go over some maintaining and cleaning techniques for your finished flood coat. Always remember, it takes 30 days, folks, before you can put something super hot on your epoxy or your countertop or your flood coat. It's just the way it is. Now, tabletop epoxy will cure to the touch and cure for handling and sanding and stuff like that, usually in about 24 hours. But when it's fully cured, it's usually 30 days before you go putting anything hot on it or hitting it with like heavy duty abrasive stuff. So what I like to do to keep my flood coats clean is I like to use an ultra microfiber towel and just some regular old household glass cleaner. You can use Windex, whatever you want to use, but this is just like glass. And when you see a good flood coat, you see that it's just like glass. There's no debris in it. There's no bubbles. There's no residue. There's nothing in there. It's just super clean and crisp. And in order to maintain that, you always want to keep it clean, keep it dust-free, and make sure that you're not using any oils or stuff like that to dull it down. Just use your regular old Windex or glass cleaner, and that will do the trick every time. You can use soap and water, but I would always recommend going over it with some glass cleaner after you do that. Now let's go over why it's important to choose a flood coat. A lot of people like flood coats because they like that glossy look, they like that glass finish, but there's other people out there who prefer oil methods like using like cutting board oil or oil that will give it a luster, but it'll give it more of a matte luster, a matte finish, and those are great. But the thing with those is that you got to keep touching them up and putting oil on them and putting wax on them and stuff like that. Nobody wants to do that. With a flood coat, not only is the flood coat preserving the wood that's underneath there for life, it's also keeping everything intact and making sure that you never have a problem with having to refinish this surface or having to resand it or having to reapply epoxy on it unless it's outside. If it is outside, you'd probably want to sand it down and reflood it at least every other year. Another reason for flood coats is they're super easy to clean, folks. Like I said earlier, you just hit them with some Windex or glass cleaner, and that's it. And Again, they are really beautiful, they're eye-catching, and they're super appealing. Well, this has been Steve with Upstart Epoxy. We hope you learned something from this video. Leave us a comment or send us an email, and we'd love to work with you and help you out with any questions or comments that you folks may have. We'll see you next time.